Ever feel like you're just empty? Like the world's happening around you, but you're watching it from behind a thick pane of glass, hearing the muffled sounds, but not really feeling any of it? That's emotional numbness. And no, you're not alone in it. It's more common than most people admit. You wake up, go through the motions, smile when you should, nod when expected, and inside, nothing. Like your soul's on mute. It's not sadness exactly. It's not anger. It's just blank. What if the secret to finding calm when you feel nothing isn't about chasing emotions, but understanding them through the lens of ancient wisdom? It sounds counterintuitive, but that's exactly what Stoic philosophy offers, not a push toward more feeling, but an invitation to be still. To let the quiet teach you something. You're going through the motions, nodding along, but inside, there's just a void. That emotional detachment can feel like floating without a tether. But there's a way to anchor yourself, not in stimulation, but in simplicity. This is where Stoicism becomes more than dusty old scrolls. It becomes your guide. With practices grounded in self-discipline, clarity, and radical acceptance, Stoicism offers surprisingly relevant tools for when your inner world falls silent. So take a breath. Settle into this stillness. The glow of your screen, the soft rustle of your blanket, the way your fingers absent-mindedly fidget with that edge, it's all okay. You're here. You probably won't know this, but the ancient Stoics didn't believe feelings were the enemy, they just didn't trust them to lead the way. Which, actually makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Before you settle in, feel free to like the video if it brought you a little peace, and if you'd like to join us again, we'd love to have you back. Subscribe when you're ready. No pressure, just rest. Share something if you feel like it. Let's slowly drift into tonight's quiet moments together. So what do the Stoics actually say when your emotions take a vacation? When you're not really sad, not really anxious, not anything? That's where we begin, by meeting emotional numbness not with panic, but with presence. You notice that you've stopped responding to things that used to move you. Someone says something funny, you smile politely, but nothing inside really reacts. You look at a beautiful sky, and instead of wonder, you just think, well, that's blue. This isn't laziness. It's not some failure of character. It's your nervous system throwing up a kind of temporary insulation. One that might be protecting you from overwhelm, or maybe, it's just run out of juice for now. In mainstream psychology, emotional numbness is often linked with something called dissociation, a mental mechanism that helps you distance from emotional pain. A 2020 study in Journal of Affective Disorders found that emotional blunting often appears in people managing high levels of stress, trauma, or burnout. It's like the mind puts on noise-canceling headphones, not to ignore reality, but to make it tolerable. And here's the twist, that weird feeling of detachment. The Stoics would have called that a space of clarity, a rare moment when you're no longer tangled up in the swirl of reaction. While the modern world might tell you to snap out of it, Stoicism would suggest, maybe lean in. You might find this surprising, the Stoics actively practiced apatheia. No, not apathy in the lazy sense. Apatheia meant a calm state of mind, free from the grip of destructive emotions. It wasn't about not feeling, it was about not being yanked around by feelings. Sound familiar? Now, there's a long-standing debate about whether Stoic detachment is truly healthy, or just emotionally repressed. Some scholars argue that Stoicism denies the richness of human emotion. Others believe it's actually the ultimate emotional maturity, recognizing feelings without letting them dictate your life. The answer? Probably somewhere in between. And here's where your emotional numbness comes in. What if, instead of seeing it as a problem to fix, you treated it like a message? Like a pause button the universe hit for you? You're not malfunctioning. You're being asked to observe. Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor and part-time overthinker, once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He wasn't suggesting that feelings are bad, just unreliable guides. Which, fair? You sitting there, with your body present but your emotions offline? That could actually be an ideal place to begin the Stoic path. Because you're already not reacting. That means you can start practicing responding. Picture your inner world like a radio. Lately, the signal's been fuzzed out. No songs, no talk shows, just static. Stoicism doesn't rush to twist the knobs, it invites you to listen to the static. To notice it. To sit with it without labeling it as wrong. That's your starting line. There's even a quirky side note in Stoic training. Young Stoics were often encouraged to imagine losing everything they loved, homes, relationships, health, not to be depressing, but to rehearse calm in the face of loss. If that's not embracing emotional distance, what is? So if you're walking through life with a kind of muted stillness, don't panic. The Stoics didn't fear that stillness. They cultivated it. And what you're experiencing now? It might just be an unintentional form of it. In a world where everything demands urgency, notifications, replies, reactions, your numbness is a strange kind of resistance. A weird little rebellion that says, no thanks. I'll just watch. And that might be the most Stoic thing you've ever done. That opens a door. Because now, you're not chasing emotion. You're observing it. And in that observation, the seeds of calm begin to take root. You don't have to fix the numbness tonight. You just have to witness it without judgment. That's enough. And that gentle shift in attention leads us right into something deeper. You walk through your day like a ghost in your own story. People laugh, music plays, dogs bark in the distance, and somehow, it's like you're underwater watching it all happen through glass. That weight pressing on your chest? It's not pain. It's detachment. And no, that doesn't mean you're broken. It might mean your brain is trying to protect you. Psychologically speaking, emotional detachment often emerges from prolonged stress, trauma, or deep exhaustion. It's not that you won't feel, it's that you can't, at least not right now. It's your mind flipping the switch to survival mode. Less drama, less intensity, less everything. A 2018 study published in Clinical Psychology Review found that individuals exposed to long-term emotional overwhelm often develop emotional numbing as a coping response. It's the nervous system pulling the fire alarm and then silencing the bells to keep things from spiraling. You become functional but flat. Efficient, yet empty. It's an adaptive reaction to too much stimulation. Ironically, the price of holding it together is sometimes losing touch with what you're holding. And here's a fun little twist. In Stoic philosophy, that kind of emotional distance isn't far off from their ideal state. The Stoics didn't chase highs or obsess over lows. They practiced ataraxia, or tranquility, a peace that isn't shaken by praise or insult, love or loss. So when you feel disconnected, you might already be tasting the edges of what the Stoics were cultivating. Accidentally Stoic. Who knew? That said, the psychological version and the philosophical one aren't the same. There remains considerable disagreement about whether Stoicism genuinely helps emotional health, or if it risks reinforcing emotional suppression. Some mental health experts worry that Stoic detachment can mask real suffering. Others argue that it offers the structure and stability that fragile emotions desperately need. It's a valid debate. But here's where you can thread the needle. The Stoics weren't emotionless, they were intentional. And emotional detachment becomes dangerous when it turns into apathy. What you want instead is that quiet state where you care without crumbling. That space where you act without needing to feel everything all at once. Picture this, you're sitting in traffic. Nothing's moving. Horns are blaring. Someone's singing badly in the car next to you. Normally, you'd stew. Or fume. Or blast music to drown it all out. But today? You just watch. You notice. You sit in it. Not irritated. Not joyful. Just aware. That's what the Stoics practice daily. Removing themselves from the reflexive chaos of emotional extremes and planting themselves in the middle space, the still zone. Now let's bring it back to you. When your emotions are MIA, it's tempting to think you need to get back to who you were before. But Stoicism nudges you forward, not back. It asks, what if this is part of your evolution? What if your system is whispering, you've been overstimulated too long? Let's pause. Not forever. Just for now. Just a quirky detail. The philosopher Epictetus believed that emotions were like passers-by. You notice them, acknowledge their presence, but don't follow them down the street. If that doesn't describe the feeling of detachment, nothing does. You see the emotion at the edge of your awareness, but you don't chase it. And that's okay. Because even in that space of non-feeling, life is still happening. You're still showing up. You're still brushing your teeth, replying to emails, petting your cat. And while it might feel mechanical, Stoicism says that action, right action, is what defines us, not mood. There's comfort in that, isn't there? That you don't have to feel like it to do the right thing. You can show kindness without warm fuzzies. You can listen deeply even if your chest feels hollow. You can move through your day with intention, even when your inner world feels foggy. In fact, some of your most grounded moments might come without emotion getting in the way. Now, let's be clear, this isn't about settling for numbness. It's about reframing it. Not as a failure of personality, but as a moment of recalibration. The Stoics believe that between stimulus and response lies our greatest freedom, the space to choose our reaction. That space? That's what you're living in right now. You're not reacting. You're pausing. And in that pause is potential. There's an ancient exercise called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Stoics would start their day by imagining what could go wrong: missed appointments, bad weather, conflict, loss. Not to be gloomy, but to train their minds not to be ruled by emotional shock. You're doing your own version now, living in a space where emotion feels distant, but not dangerous. And this slow, quiet shift in perspective? That's where Stoicism becomes incredibly practical. It says, yes, emotions are natural. But they are not mandatory for meaningful action. That's a relief when you feel like you've lost your emotional spark. In modern terms, think of it like this: your emotional dashboard is dimmed. But your engine still runs. The lights are low, but the machine's intact. The Stoics wouldn't rush to crank the brightness. They'd ask you to listen to the hum beneath the silence. And that, oddly enough, is your doorway to peace. Because emotional detachment doesn't mean you're drifting away. Sometimes, it means you're returning to yourself, quietly, steadily, and without fanfare. And that kind of return takes time. So tonight, if you're sitting with this feeling, this heavy quiet, know that it doesn't make you less alive. It might just mean you're in a different phase of being. One the Stoics knew well. One they trusted deeply. Let that awareness linger, because next, we're going to look at how stillness, rather than being a void, can actually hold everything you've been searching for. So you're sitting in that quiet. Maybe the world feels too sharp, or maybe it doesn't feel like anything at all. No sparks, no drama, just a long, low hum. At first, that silence inside you might feel like a red flag. But here's the radical idea: what if that stillness isn't a problem to solve, but a place to settle into? Because here's something quietly powerful: the Stoics didn't see stillness as emptiness. They saw it as strength. As something you create, not endure. A steady inner platform from which everything else becomes clearer. Modern psychology backs this up in a roundabout way. A 2021 study in personality and individual differences explored the effects of low arousal positive emotions, like calm, contentment, and quiet joy. It found that while these states don't give you a dopamine rush, they support long-term well-being, cognitive clarity, and even physical health. Translation: that quiet you're feeling isn't nothing. It's something. It's a soft landing zone for your overstimulated nervous system. And here's an odd little gem for you: ancient Stoics sometimes practiced Sabbath-like silence, deliberate periods of verbal and emotional quiet to recalibrate their minds. This wasn't retreat. It was reset. They didn't see silence as a void to be filled, but as a resource to be protected. The issue has sparked significant intellectual debate over the years. Some argue that this kind of deliberate stillness can border on escapism, especially if you're using it to avoid emotion rather than understand it. Others suggest it's a form of deep wisdom, the ability to stop grasping for stimulation and simply be. Is it avoidance or acceptance? Depends on how you use it. So let's talk about how you can use it. You wake up, and the numbness is still there. Not a dark cloud, more like a blank sky. You don't want to feel empty. But you're also too tired to pretend. That's when you remember, maybe this quiet can be useful. Maybe it can hold space for something that words or feelings can't quite reach. Here's what the Stoics teach: when the surface of your mind is still, you can actually see what lies underneath. It's like a lake. When the wind dies down, the water settles. And in that reflection, you start to notice what's real, what matters. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, often wrote about retreating into himself, not to escape life, but to see it more clearly. His famous line, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." He wasn't recommending isolation. He was describing a skill, the ability to create calm inside, no matter the chaos outside. So what happens when you stop fighting the numbness and just let it be? Not resigning to it, but sitting next to it like an old friend. You begin to notice your breath. The way your body feels in space. The quiet buzz of electronics. The soft hum of life continuing, with or without your emotional engagement. It's oddly beautiful. A little eerie, sure, but still beautiful. Here's a weird little bonus. In certain forms of Stoic meditation, practitioners were taught to observe thoughts as clouds. Not to interpret, not to analyze, just to witness. Feelings too. Imagine that. You don't have to do anything with your emotions. You just watch them pass. Even when the sky is empty, that's still part of the sky. And if your clouds aren't showing up today, that's okay too. Let's bring it to the present. Your phone buzzes. A friend wants to hang out, and you just can't. Not from dislike, not from fatigue. Just apathy. You worry that you're being a bad friend. A boring person. A shell. But what if you flipped that? What if you're someone learning to sit in quiet, and that's actually rare? What if your stillness is something sacred, not defective? Because in a world that sells constant feeling, content that shocks, products that promise happiness, posts that demand outrage, your lack of reaction is almost revolutionary. The Stoics would tip their hats to you. Or their togas. You get the idea. Of course, numbness can still feel uncomfortable. Like your soul's wearing mittens. You want to feel something sharp and real, and instead, you're wrapped in cotton. But here's the gentle truth, that cotton might be a buffer while your inner system recalibrates. And until that spark returns, the stillness can be your teacher. Think of it this way, when you stop straining to feel, you create space to listen. Not just to your thoughts, but to your needs. Maybe it's rest. Maybe it's meaning. Maybe it's nothing at all, and you just need to sit. That leads us into a simple but profound Stoic exercise, journaling without urgency. Don't try to make it poetic. Just observe. I felt nothing when I heard the news. I didn't want to smile at lunch. I looked at the sun and didn't care. These aren't confessions. They're data. The Stoics treated inner experiences like scientists, recording without judgment. And that's the key: when you feel nothing, don't force meaning. Let awareness be the meaning. Stillness isn't a lack. It's an opening. A rare, quiet doorway that leads you deeper into yourself, past the noisy clutter of forced feelings and into something older and calmer. So tonight, if you're sitting there wrapped in quiet, outside your own emotions, unsure what to do with the blankness, try not to rush away from it. You're not missing out. You're learning a kind of peace that most people will never find. And that quiet foundation? That's what we'll build on next. Because once you stop chasing feelings, you're free to start watching them. And that shift, small as it seems, changes everything. It's a strange thing, this feeling of being unplugged from your own emotional circuitry. You're not drowning in sadness, not overwhelmed by anxiety, just hovering somewhere in the void. It feels clinical, like a muted documentary of your own life. But here's where the Stoics offer something quietly radical. Maybe this isn't dysfunction. Maybe it's a rare invitation to become the observer. You're not broken, you're observing. The part of you that once reacted instantly is now sitting back. Watching. Noticing. And while that might feel like detachment in the clinical sense, the Stoics would have called it wisdom. Let's rewind a bit. In modern psychology, there's a concept called meta-awareness, your ability to observe your thoughts and feelings without becoming entangled in them. A 2017 article in Frontiers in Psychology explains how this self-reflective stance helps with emotional regulation and reduces rumination. Instead of feeling every storm, you become the one holding the umbrella. Or, if we're being honest, maybe you're just sitting inside, watching the storm out the window with a hot drink and zero desire to go outside. Still valid. The Stoics were early champions of meta-awareness before it even had a name. They trained themselves to step outside the swirl of emotions, not to deny them, but to watch them pass. Like weather, like waves. You're doing the same thing right now, whether you realize it or not. Here's something unexpected. Seneca, the Roman Stoic who wrote volumes about courage and grief, once admitted in his letters that he often didn't feel what he thought he was supposed to feel. Joy didn't always arrive when it should. Grief came delayed. His takeaway? That the timing and intensity of emotions don't define us. Our response to them does. Philosophers have long debated the nature of this kind of emotional delay. Is it numbness? Is it control? Is it an evolved form of consciousness, or just fatigue in disguise? We don't have a neat answer. But what we do have is your experience, and how you choose to frame it. Let's say you're at a birthday party. People are laughing, music's playing, candles are lit. It should feel warm. You want to feel warm. But inside, there's just static. No glow. No emotional echo. That's the moment when your mind can slip into judgment. What's wrong with me? Why am I like this? But what if you chose curiosity instead? The Stoics practiced oikeiosis, a concept roughly translated as becoming familiar with oneself, one's nature. It's the gentle act of turning inward not to fix, but to understand. They didn't expect themselves to always feel the right thing. They expected themselves to learn from whatever they were feeling, or not feeling. So if your emotions feel like they've packed up and left, maybe they haven't disappeared. Maybe they've just stepped into the background so you can observe without being overwhelmed. Just a curious detail here, some Stoic practitioners used physical sensations, like the weight of a stone in their pocket or the cold of morning air, to remind themselves to come back to the present. Sensation, after all, doesn't lie. Even when emotion dims, your body keeps telling the truth. That's something you can try right now. Press your fingers against your palm. Feel the texture of your clothing. Listen for a distant sound, a fridge, a car outside, your own breath. When you feel nothing inside, tune into what's happening outside. Stoicism teaches you to use the world as a mirror for your mind. And if you're thinking, that's nice, but I don't want to live in a constant state of disconnection, you're not wrong. Numbness isn't the goal. But the awareness you're building within it? That's a skill most people don't even know they need. Here's the shift, you're not waiting for feelings to return so you can start living again. You're living now, by choosing attention over reaction. Stillness over scrambling. Observation over interpretation. The trick is to notice when the observer in you slips into the critic. The moment you go from, I'm feeling nothing right now, to, something's wrong with me, that's when Stoic thinking becomes essential. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke. Translation: you don't control the numbness, but you do control how you frame it. So what does this look like in daily life? It means noticing without labeling. Naming your experience without analyzing it to death. I feel flat. Okay. I feel outside myself. Fine. I'm not reacting to things I used to love. Understood. Now, breathe. You're allowed to be here without solving it. This is where Stoicism quietly shines. It offers no flashy techniques, no mantras, no tricks to magically summon joy. It offers awareness, integrity, presence. You are the still point in a spinning world. Not numb by default, observing by choice. Another quirky note from Stoic practice: they used to rehearse being dead. Not to be edgy, but to confront the impermanence of everything. The idea? When you face what you fear the most, your daily inconveniences, and yes, even emotional lulls, start to shrink in comparison. This isn't morbid. It's grounding. If death is inevitable, then silence doesn't need to be feared. It can be a teacher. So tonight, if your emotional compass still won't spin, take that as a moment to just look. Not for feelings. Not for meaning. Just observe yourself being a human. Breathing. Thinking. Existing without explanation. Because observation, over time, creates clarity. And clarity? That's where healing begins. Which brings us gently into what's next: how stepping back from emotions doesn't mean shutting them off, but seeing them more clearly than ever. So now you're sitting back, watching the quiet unfold inside you like fog across a field. There's still no real emotion there, not joy, not sorrow, not even boredom, just a kind of emotional neutrality. And maybe that neutrality has started to whisper to you, am I disconnected? Or am I just seeing things more clearly? Enter cognitive distancing, the Stoic way. In modern psychology, cognitive distancing is often used in cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, to help people gain perspective on their thoughts. It's the ability to say, I'm having the thought that I'm numb, rather than, I am numb. That subtle shift puts space between you and your internal experience. And the Stoics? They were doing that 2,000 years before psychology gave it a name. The ancient Stoic Epictetus was basically a walking therapy session. He believed that we're disturbed not by events, but by our opinions about them. That includes feelings, or the absence of them. If you feel emotionally flat, the feeling itself isn't the issue. The distress often comes from the narrative, I shouldn't feel this way. Something's wrong with me. This must mean I'm broken. But Stoicism pulls you away from that storyline. It hands you binoculars and says, observe. Don't judge. Here's a neat side note: in some ancient Stoic texts, emotions were referred to as fantasiae, or impressions. Not truth. Not commands. Just impressions of what's happening. You get to decide whether they're helpful or not. So if your emotional world feels like it's been drained of color, you're not malfunctioning, you're experiencing a filtered impression. And guess what? Filters can be adjusted. A long-standing controversy surrounds whether Stoicism encourages true emotional health or merely emotional control. Critics argue that detachment might block authentic relationships or blunt necessary responses to injustice. Others claim it sharpens emotional intelligence by freeing you from over-identification with feelings. The truth likely rests on how Stoic tools are applied, as walls or as windows. And in your case, when emotions feel absent, these tools become lifelines. Here's a quirky little example from your everyday life. Let's say you're scrolling through old photos. You remember the happiness in them, but you don't feel it now. That's not uncommon. The Stoics would see that moment as a cue, not to chase the lost emotion, but to notice your reaction to its absence. You might think, why don't I feel anything looking at this? That's where cognitive distancing kicks in. You take that thought and hold it at arm's length. You say, I'm observing that I expected to feel joy, and I'm not. That's it. No panic. No shame. Just perspective. This way of thinking isn't about suppressing emotions. It's about transforming your relationship with them. You're learning to step out of the flood and onto the shore. From there, you can actually see what's happening without drowning in it. Now, let's talk about something subtle but important. You don't have to feel differently to think clearly. Cognitive distancing lets you function, make decisions, and even offer care to others, even when you're emotionally neutral. Let's say a friend calls you in distress. You feel, not much. No urge to cry with them, no swelling of empathy. But you still listen. You offer support. You say what's needed. To them, you seem composed. Maybe even strong. What they don't see is the inner dialogue. Shouldn't I feel more? Why am I like this? But that internal questioning doesn't disqualify your action. In fact, Stoics would say your calm presence is a gift. Here's something unexpected. Modern research shows that emotional detachment, when managed consciously, can be a powerful tool for caretakers, doctors, and first responders. A 2016 study in emotion found that professionals who used cognitive distancing were less likely to burn out and more likely to make ethical decisions under pressure. The trick was awareness, not numbness, but chosen distance. That's what you're practicing right now. You're learning to say, this is what's happening inside me. It's not who I am. And it doesn't control what I do. That might sound small, but it's quietly revolutionary. Now, if you're thinking, okay, that's nice, but I'd still like to feel something, that's fair. Nobody wants to live in grayscale forever. But here's where Stoic distance helps you hold out for authentic emotion, instead of grasping at whatever noise shows up first. Cognitive distancing gives you room to wait, not with impatience, but with steadiness. It lets you avoid latching onto drama just to feel something. Because here's the hidden danger. When you're numb, even chaos starts to look like a tempting shortcut back to aliveness. Stoicism says, wait. Let the real feeling return on its own terms. Don't fake it. Don't force it. Just clear space. A weird little bonus from Stoic history. Some schools encouraged students to practice imagining insults, then responding to them with complete inner silence. Not to deny the sting, but to remind themselves they chose how much power to give any moment. If you can train that level of detachment toward offense, imagine what happens when you apply it to your own critical thoughts. You hear them. But you don't become them. So tonight, if your mind is drifting and your heart feels like a closed door, don't knock louder. Just stand quietly in front of it. Notice the shape of the door. Its silence. Its strength. That is the work. That is the skill. Because in Stoic terms, your ability to create distance from your emotional reactions is actually the first step to deeper understanding. Not a flaw. Not a failure. A practice. And that practice? It gently leads us into a deeper truth, that emotions aren't your enemy. They're just information. Weather reports. What you do with that forecast is where Stoic calm begins to take shape. So here you are, sitting with a whole lot of nothing. Emotions still off in the distance somewhere, maybe packing their bags, maybe on vacation, maybe just ghosting you entirely. You're not sinking, but you're not exactly rising either. And that might have you asking a fair question. If I'm not feeling much of anything, how do I know what to do? How do I move forward without any inner signal telling me where to go? Here's the Stoic answer. Your emotions are data, not destiny. Feelings, according to the Stoics, are like the weather, fleeting, shifting, occasionally dramatic. But they are not the climate. They are not your core. They are not you. Mainstream psychology circles back to this same insight in a slightly different language. Emotions are now widely seen as informational signals, not commands. A 2015 study in behavior research and therapy emphasized this. While emotions can point toward underlying needs or threats, they don't always offer reliable guidance. Just because you feel anxious doesn't mean something bad is happening. Just because you feel nothing doesn't mean nothing matters. That's where Stoicism steps in with a calm shrug and says, exactly. You are not at the mercy of your feelings. You're the interpreter. You're the navigator. And that means even in the absence of emotional momentum, you can still act on principle. Still choose. Here's a lesser-known fact. Stoic philosophers believed that strong emotion often clouded logic and distorted judgment. Epictetus referred to passions as opinions gone wild. So if your internal fire has temporarily gone out, that's not necessarily a liability. It might just mean your system is quiet enough to see clearly. You're operating without static. The issue has sparked significant philosophical inquiry over centuries, whether emotions are essential for moral decisions, or if reason alone is enough. Are feelings what make us human, or what make us irrational? Stoicism leans hard into the second theory. It says, your character isn't measured by how you feel. It's measured by what you do when you don't feel anything at all. And right now, you're living in that test. You're moving through your day without the inner compass of emotion to nudge you. You're cooking dinner not because it excites you, but because your body needs food. You're replying to messages not because you're full of energy, but because connection matters, even when it feels flat. This is Stoic living in real time. Here's an interesting little detour. In Stoic schools, students were trained to separate impressions as a daily mental drill. They would notice a feeling arise, say, envy or disappointment, and then dissect it. What caused this? What judgment did I attach to it? Is it helpful? Is it necessary? You can do the same thing in emotional absence. You ask, why do I expect to feel something right now? What does my lack of emotion say about me? And does it actually change what I need to do today? Let's get practical. You're at work. You've got a deadline. But your usual motivational gears aren't turning. You feel blank. Not lazy. Not overwhelmed. Just emotionally quiet. You could wait for inspiration to strike. Or, you could do the work anyway. The Stoics would say especially then. Because discipline matters more than emotional charge. Purpose matters more than mood. This mindset can take a load off your shoulders. You no longer have to feel the right thing to do the right thing. There's a strange comfort in that. It means your inner life doesn't have to be a perfectly tuned symphony all the time. Sometimes, it's okay for it to be background noise, or even silence. What matters is the decision you make with what you've got. And here's something a bit unusual from Stoic practice. They often wrote down actions they took while feeling nothing. Why? To prove to themselves that feelings weren't prerequisites for living well. You can go for a walk, call a friend, write in your journal, or help a neighbor, all without emotion dragging you there. That's called prohairesis, the Stoic idea of moral will. It's the centerpiece of who you are, not what you feel, but what you choose. Just a strange but true tidbit, in ancient Stoic circles, emotions were sometimes grouped into natural and excessive. Natural emotions, like calm concern, mild joy, gentle caution, were accepted as part of a well-ordered life. But excessive ones? Anger, wild grief, manic desire? Those were seen as signs you were no longer steering the ship. If you're feeling nothing, you're definitely not being steered by chaos. In a strange way, the Stoics might say you're in a more stable place than you realize. This doesn't mean you should avoid emotions. But it means you're allowed to keep living in their absence. You can be kind without feeling warm. You can rest without feeling peaceful. You can show up without feeling ready. All of that is allowed. And all of that is Stoic. So the next time your mind offers a thought like, I can't connect right now, respond with, okay. But I can still act with integrity. That little pivot changes everything. It removes the burden of having to feel right in order to live right. Because Stoicism, at its core, isn't about being emotionless, it's about not being ruled by emotion. And for you, that lesson might be arriving in the form of this eerie, persistent quiet. A quiet that, oddly enough, gives you space to decide on purpose. And that intention? That choice to live deliberately in the absence of emotion? That's more than just coping. That's strength. So when you sit down to reflect later tonight, and still nothing stirs in your chest, try asking yourself this instead: what mattered today? Not what felt meaningful, but what was meaningful. Because when you start focusing on values over vibes, that's when Stoic clarity takes over. And that shift will guide us next. You sit at the edge of your bed, phone in hand, another day blurred behind you. You scroll. You yawn. You feel nothing. Not bad, not good. Just still. And in that stillness, a quiet question rises. If I don't feel anything, how do I know what matters? That's when Stoicism leans in and answers with a calm little nudge, values over vibes. Because here's the truth that most of modern life skips over: feelings aren't always reliable. They're slippery, shifting, sometimes overwhelming, sometimes absent. If you wait for the right vibe to do the right thing, you might wait forever. But values? Values are your inner compass, the steady roots beneath the emotional weather. This is one of the cornerstones of Stoic thinking. Marcus Aurelius wrote repeatedly about living in alignment with nature. His version of nature wasn't forests and birds, though he liked those too, but your nature. Who you are beneath emotion, beneath thought. Your reason. Your moral character. Your values. Psychology's catching up here. A well-known technique in acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, is called values-based action. Studies, like a 2019 meta-analysis in Journal of Contextual Behavioral Science, show that acting according to personal values, even in the absence of motivation or emotional clarity, significantly improves long-term well-being. Not because you feel better instantly, but because your actions become meaningful, even when your emotions are AWOL. So let's bring that to you. Let's say your vibe is neutral. You're not feeling inspired. You don't particularly care about your to-do list. But you have a value, say, kindness. You believe in being there for people. So when a friend texts, you reply. Not because you're bursting with love, but because that's who you are. That's a values-based action. The Stoics practiced this constantly. They didn't wait to feel like being just, or generous, or rational. They saw every situation as a moment to exercise character. A training ground. Even when their internal world was quiet or chaotic, they asked, what's the right thing here? Not the exciting thing. Not the emotionally rewarding thing. The right thing. Here's something unusual from the Stoic world. They categorized life into two things: what you can control, and what you can't. That's it. You can't control whether you feel joy right now. But you can control whether you act with compassion, integrity, and patience. The Stoics called those your excellences. We might call them your core values. Different language, same truth. And here's a strange but true nugget: ancient Stoics viewed emotions not as evil, but as the product of judgments. They believed that if your judgments were aligned with truth and virtue, your emotions would eventually follow. So if you keep living by your values, even when you don't feel much, your emotional world may slowly rejoin the party. On its own timeline. There remains considerable disagreement among scholars about whether Stoicism fosters emotional growth or simply emotional regulation. Some say it's too rigid, that it discourages vulnerability. Others argue that it builds the emotional muscle needed to weather storms without falling apart. What's clear, though, is that it's not about being cold. It's about being intentional. Now let's zoom in for a moment. You're sitting in a cafe. Your coffee is warm, the sunlight hits your sleeve just right, and still, you feel distant. Flat. But instead of spiraling into, what's wrong with me, you ask yourself something gentler. What do I value right now? Maybe it's presence. Maybe it's gratitude. Maybe it's quiet resilience. So you put the phone down. You take a sip. You breathe. That tiny moment of choosing value over vibe? That's Stoic practice. Here's a quirky little side note. The Stoic teacher Musonius Rufus, who taught in the early Roman Empire, believed that eating habits were one of the best ways to live by your values. He advised his students to eat simply, deliberately, and gratefully, regardless of mood. Not because food needed to be solemn, but because discipline in small things shaped character. In other words, even your breakfast can be a value-driven act. So tomorrow morning, when you reach for cereal with a blank stare, know this: you're still practicing. This isn't about forcing positivity. It's about lowering the volume on mood and raising the volume on meaning. When you can't feel the emotional why, let the value why lead the way. Think of it this way: vibes are passengers. Values are the vehicle. Vibes might nap, complain, or hop out unexpectedly. But your values? They're the frame that keeps the journey moving forward. So here's a quick exercise from modern therapeutic practice that blends beautifully with Stoic thinking: the values check-in. Try this tonight before bed. Ask yourself, what did I do today that aligned with my values, even in small ways? Where did I let emotional absence stop me? What's one value I want to embody tomorrow, regardless of how I feel? Keep your answers short. No need for poetry. The point isn't to fix the numbness, it's to remember that even in the quiet, you can live with purpose. Because here's the deeper truth: values are immune to mood. They don't fade when emotions go quiet. They're not threatened by numbness. They exist beneath it. And when you act from that level, you're doing more than coping. You're building identity. And in a world obsessed with how things feel, that quiet alignment with who you are becomes revolutionary. So the next time you feel blank, ask, what do I care about when I'm not distracted by feelings? What would I choose, even if no emotion cheered me on? That's your compass. And that inner compass? That's what we're going to tune even finer in the next breath. Because how you perceive your emotional landscape changes everything about how you move through it. You're already starting to feel it, not a feeling in the emotional sense, but a shift. A subtle reorientation. The moment when your mind stops asking, when will I feel something again, and starts asking, what's actually happening here? That, right there, is the beginning of perception training. And in the world of Stoicism, perception is everything. Because if you've lost your emotional signal, the way you perceive your experience becomes your primary lens. You're not being guided by feelings anymore, you're being guided by interpretation. And as the Stoics would say, interpretation is the key to either suffering or serenity. This is the discipline of perception. One of the Stoic 3 disciplines, alongside action and will. Perception isn't just how you see the world, it's how you frame it. And when emotions fade into the background, perception becomes even more important. It's what gives shape to the blank space. There's compelling research here too. A 2020 study in Emotion Review explored how cognitive reappraisal, changing the way we interpret emotional events, has a direct impact on emotional well-being, even in people experiencing flat affect or burnout. You don't need intense feelings to reframe an experience. You just need attention. You just need awareness. Which means that right now, in this emotional low-volume period, your perception can either quietly sabotage you, or quietly empower you. Let's look at an example. You wake up and think, I feel nothing. This day is already off. That's one perception. But another possibility? I'm calm. My system is quiet. Let's see what that quiet can teach me today. The same situation. 2 entirely different paths. The Stoics would say, choose the one that aligns with virtue, steadiness, and resilience. Not because it feels better, but because it is better. Here's an unexpected detail. The Stoics used to practice view from above visualizations. They would imagine rising above their problems, seeing their life from a bird's eye view. Epictetus encouraged students to imagine their tiny place in the cosmos, not to feel small, but to feel free. When you zoom out, you shift the way your mind processes significance. You stop reacting to everything as if it's the center of the universe. You can do this with your own numbness. Instead of thinking, why can't I feel anything, imagine looking down at yourself gently from above. No judgment. Just observation. There I am, going through a hard season. Moving through the fog. Still showing up. It's a softer lens. It gives you space. Philosophers have long debated whether perception is a reliable route to truth or simply a psychological coping tool. In Stoic thought, perception is both shield and sword. It's how you shape your internal experience, even when the external world, or your internal world, doesn't make a lot of noise. And if that stillness feels like a threat, perception turns it into an opportunity. If it feels like isolation, perception reveals solitude. If it feels like emptiness, perception suggests space. Your interpretation creates your emotional architecture. Just a quirky note from Stoic texts: some thinkers, like hierarchs, believed you could train perception like a muscle, by extending circles of compassion and reason outward. First to yourself, then to family, then to community, and eventually to the whole of humanity. Each expansion required you to see differently. So even in emotional flatness, you could stretch your perception outward and create meaning. And yes, there's modern science for that too. Functional MRI scans have shown that perception-based reframing activates the prefrontal cortex, the reasoning center of your brain, even in people experiencing emotional blunting. So the practice of perception isn't a placebo. It's a neural shift. Let's take that to something ordinary. You're cleaning your room. Not because you feel motivated. Not because it sparks joy, sorry, Marie Kondo. Just because it needs to be done. Your first thought might be, this is dull. I'm just going through the motions. But shift your perception: I'm bringing order to my space. I'm creating calm through action. That one shift in how you see it changes your posture, your pace, your sense of self. The Stoics believe that no event is inherently good or bad, it becomes so based on how you interpret it. This applies directly to your emotional silence. It's not bad. It's not good. It's raw material. What you do with it is what makes it one or the other. Now, there's a trap here. It's easy to think, okay, I'll just try to see everything positively. But that's not what the Stoics meant. They didn't sugarcoat anything. They just refused to be passive. If perception shapes your inner life, then shaping perception becomes your responsibility. You're not feeling joy? Fine. Perceive usefulness. You're not feeling hope? Perceive momentum. You're not feeling connected? Perceive quiet endurance. You don't need to trick yourself into false feelings. You just need to interpret your world with intention. A small exercise for later: try journaling your day in neutral observations. Don't rate your experience. Don't label emotions. Just record the facts and then note the lens through which you viewed each one. Were you harsh? Were you gentle? Were you curious? You'll start to see how perception creates texture, even in emotional stillness. And here's where that really matters: numbness isn't a full shutdown. It's a shift in signal. And when you can't rely on internal cues, you rely on framing. That's your anchor. Because in the discipline of perception, you learn to take any state, even one that feels like nothing, and shape it into something meaningful. Not because your feelings told you to, but because your mind did. And that quiet mental discipline? That takes us one step further, not just reframing numbness, but seeing it as a kind of intelligence. A signal that you're still deeply human, even when you don't feel like it. So here's the moment where you pause, not to react, but to wonder: if I'm not feeling anything, does that mean something's wrong with me? It's a familiar thought. That gnawing suspicion that numbness equals weakness. That emotional flatness is somehow evidence that you've failed at being fully human. But let's stop that spiral right there. Because Stoicism would say, numb doesn't mean numbskull. You're not dull because you're quiet inside. You're not broken because the emotional fireworks aren't going off. You might actually be more aware, more sensitive to nuance, more introspective than you've ever been. And that can look a lot like emptiness from the outside. Let's talk psychology for a second. Emotional blunting, a symptom often found in people with depression, PTSD, or burnout, isn't necessarily a deficit of empathy or intellect. According to a 2022 study in Journal of Clinical Psychology, it can be a cognitive conservation mechanism, a way the brain protects itself when overstimulation or long-term stress has left it running on fumes. It's not that you've become less, it's that your mind is protecting its bandwidth. Here's something off the beaten path. Some philosophers, including later Stoic-influenced thinkers in the Enlightenment, believed that emotional minimalism led to clearer reasoning. You weren't distracted by dramatic impulses. You had more room to think, to weigh, to reflect. There was wisdom in the quiet. Even genius. A weird little bonus fact. Leonardo da Vinci, who admired Stoic philosophy, was known for appearing emotionally distant, even cold, to people who met him. But his notebooks are filled with reflection, wonder, and compassion. He didn't display emotion the way others expected, but that didn't mean it wasn't there. A long-standing intellectual debate surrounds this exact point. Does emotional flatness reflect internal apathy, or is it a mask for deeper processing? Are those who feel less simply in pause mode, or do they inhabit a different emotional terrain entirely? Psychologists, philosophers, and neuroscientists are still arguing. Meanwhile, you're here, quietly living it. So what if we took that numbness and reframed it, not as dysfunction, but as intelligence in disguise? A sign that your internal world is busy reconfiguring itself, adjusting the sliders, turning down the volume so you can hear something deeper underneath. The Stoics would nod in agreement. They believed wisdom wasn't found in the highs and lows, it was found in equanimity. In that middle space where clarity lives. If you're there now, it's not a failure. It's a practice. Let's bring it into something tangible. You're having a conversation. Someone tells you a sad story. You know you should feel more. But you don't. Still, you respond thoughtfully. You ask questions. You give them space. And when they say, "Thanks for being here," something inside you quietly registers, "I did show up." That's not fake. That's presence. Stoicism in action. Here's a quirky detail from Roman Stoicism. The philosopher Seneca recommended something called internal audit. Each night, before bed, he would review his day, not by how he felt, but by what he did. Did I act justly? Did I keep my temper? Did I speak truthfully? His emotional state wasn't the scorecard, his behavior was. You can try that, too. Especially on days when emotion refuses to cooperate. Ask, did I show up where I was needed? Did I hold space for someone? Did I stay true to what I believe, even quietly? If the answer is yes, that's success. Even if you felt nothing doing it. And here's something powerful to hold on to. Intelligence is often mistaken for indifference. But the ability to observe your own emotional absence, to live in that space without panicking or performing, that's not indifference. That's self-regulation. That's depth. Of course, that doesn't mean you need to stay in this state forever. You're not meant to be emotionally offline indefinitely. But during these quiet phases, you're learning a skill most people never touch, the ability to function, reflect, and stay kind without any emotional reinforcement. Let's put that in perspective. If you can stay calm and kind while feeling nothing, that's not weakness. That's character. That's cognitive maturity. It's also very, very Stoic. Marcus Aurelius, often weighed down by grief, illness, and political chaos, still wrote, "Do not then consider life a thing of any value. But look at the source of your actions, at what governs them." He wasn't telling himself to be excited. He was telling himself to be intentional. That's what you're doing now. You're showing up in your life, even without the emotional soundtrack playing in the background. That's not failure. That's subtle mastery. And if your inner critic pops up again, whispering, "Real people feel things. Something's wrong with you," gently remind it, "I am feeling. Just not in the way I used to." And that's okay. Because growth doesn't always look like joy. Sometimes it looks like silence. Stillness. That pause between chapters. You're in one of those right now. And just like the Stoics, you're learning how to keep walking forward, even when the road feels emotionally flat. So next time that blankness weighs on you, remind yourself, this isn't emptiness. This is space. Space for thoughts. Space for breath. Space for a wiser version of you to step in. And that calm intellectual space? That opens the door to something even deeper, the power of living with restraint, simplicity, and quiet intention. You walk into your room, flip on the light, glance at the clutter, and feel absolutely nothing. Not frustration. Not motivation. Not even the mild guilt that usually gets you to tidy up. Just flat indifference. And yet, you still start to clean, slowly, deliberately. Not for the dopamine. Not for the after photo. Just because it feels like the right thing to do. That's the beauty of voluntary simplicity, and the Stoics were quietly obsessed with it. They weren't trying to build joy through big emotions. They were trying to build clarity through restraint. And right now, in your emotionally muted state, you're uniquely positioned to experience it firsthand. The modern world, with all its buzzing screens and flashing lights, runs on stimulation. You're expected to feel something about everything. Advertisements scream for attention. Notifications ping. Posts beg for outrage, awe, inspiration. So when you don't feel much, you seem to be going against the current. But the Stoics? They paddled that way on purpose. They believed that stripping life down to its essentials wasn't a punishment, it was a pathway. A return to what matters. When you stop chasing stimulation, what's left is intention. Psychologically, there's something to this. A 2021 study in Nature Human Behavior found that people regularly overestimate how much stimulation they need to be satisfied. The researchers discovered that people often prefer simpler experiences, quiet walks, unscheduled evenings, even sitting alone in a room, more than they predicted. In other words, we're wired for more peace than we think. And that's what you're tasting now. You're not apathetic, you're pared down. You're not shut down, you're simplifying. You're stepping into the kind of mental silence the Stoics trained for. Here's a quirky side note. The Stoic philosopher Cleanthes reportedly lived so simply that his sandals were repaired with his own thread, and his cloak patched dozens of times. He didn't do this for aesthetic. He did it to stay anchored, to resist the drift toward distraction and indulgence. Voluntary simplicity wasn't self-denial. It was self-respect. Now, we're not saying you need to start patching your hoodie or foraging for berries. But what if this emotional flatness you're experiencing right now is actually giving you the chance to reconnect with simplicity? You're not distracted by thrills. You're not busy chasing feelings. You can see again. The texture of your blanket. The steam rising from your tea. The way a song just quietly exists in the air without demanding anything from you. In these small moments, something begins to emerge, presence. There remains considerable disagreement about whether Stoic simplicity is empowering or overly austere. Some critics say it's joyless, too rigid. Others argue it frees the mind from needing constant validation or emotional proof that life is worthwhile. But here's what's undeniable: it shifts your focus from what's missing to what's quietly enough. Think about your day. Maybe you didn't feel bursts of excitement or deep connection. But maybe you kept your space clean. Took a walk. Read a few pages of something thoughtful. Ate mindfully. That's not just surviving. That's living with clarity, even when your emotional radar is on low power mode. And it's not about romanticizing numbness, it's about respecting the tools that emerge because of it. When you're not pulled in 100 emotional directions, you can actually hear your own values more clearly. You can say, no, I don't need to answer that text right now. No, I'm not chasing that impulse purchase. Yes, I want to cook something simple and slow. Simplicity doesn't make you dull. It makes you deliberate. Here's something interesting from ancient Stoic practice. They regularly practiced voluntary discomfort. Skipping a meal, sleeping on the floor, wearing coarse clothing. Not because they hated pleasure, but because they didn't want to be owned by it. They believed the less you needed to feel good, the more free you were. And you? You're already in a phase where fewer things move you. What if, instead of fearing that, you leaned into it a little? Because let's be honest, emotional flatness can become a strange kind of gift. It forces you to pay attention to the bones of your life, the parts that stay after the thrill wears off. Simplicity, restraint, routine, these aren't empty. They're anchors. They're what remain when the emotional soundtrack fades out. And yes, it can feel a little mechanical. Like you're going through the motions. But motion matters. It's the act of continuing without needing the fireworks. It's lighting a candle even when you're not feeling spiritual. It's making your bed even when you don't feel like you matter. The Stoics would call that training. The steady conditioning of a clear life. Just a little detail you might like, Epictetus taught that every action we take either strengthens or weakens our character. So even the tiniest task, folding laundry, taking a deep breath before speaking, turning off your phone on purpose, is a vote for who you want to be. When emotions are absent, those actions are all you've got. And they're enough. Tonight, maybe your heart won't swell. Maybe your brain won't light up with gratitude or excitement. But maybe you'll sit with a cup of tea, dim the lights, and just let your body relax without needing a reason. That's simplicity. That's intention. That's stoic as it gets. So as you float in this emotionally quiet space, ask yourself, what's quietly good right now? What's enough? What can I strip down, not to punish myself, but to feel closer to my core? Because when you choose simplicity on purpose, numbness starts to feel less like emptiness, and more like clarity. A clean slate. A quiet room. A little space to breathe. And from that still simplicity, we'll shift towards something a little darker, but even more powerful, how imagining what we could lose might actually help us feel more connected to what we still have. So, you've simplified. Stripped things down to the basics. Not by choice, maybe, your emotions did that for you, but still, you're here. In the quiet. In the clarity. And just when it seems like you've hit emotional zero, Stoicism tosses you a torch. Not to light things up with forced joy, but to gently illuminate meaning through a practice that sounds dark at first, negative visualization. It's exactly what it sounds like. You imagine losing something you love. Not to be morbid. Not to spiral. But to reconnect with the value of what's already here. The Stoics called it premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of bad things. Death, loss, failure, illness. They practiced imagining these things not to court tragedy, but to prepare for it, and, strangely, to appreciate life more deeply. Even when they didn't feel appreciation. Now, you might be thinking, if I'm already emotionally flat, why would I want to think about losing more? Here's the paradox, the act of imagining loss often brings emotional presence. It can crack through numbness in a way that positivity can't. And if not, it still reconnects you with perspective. Psychologists have tapped into this too. A 2018 study in psychological science found that people who imagined losing something important, a relationship, a job, even the ability to walk, reported higher levels of gratitude than those who simply focused on the positives. The brain, it turns out, doesn't always respond to more good. Sometimes, it needs to brush up against potential loss to feel anything at all. That sounds a little risky. A little cold. But here's the Stoic trick, you don't dwell. You glance. You acknowledge. You say to yourself, this could end. This could be taken. And because of that, I choose to notice it now. A surprising Stoic ritual, some practitioners would kiss their children or loved ones in the morning with the phrase, you may not return. Not to be dramatic. But to remember that every ordinary moment is a possible last one. And in remembering that, they felt more present, even in the numbest phases of life. There's a spirited academic debate about whether this kind of visualization builds resilience or breeds anxiety. Some argue it's too bleak, especially for those already emotionally taxed. But the key difference lies in how you use it. You're not imagining loss to catastrophize, you're imagining it to reconnect. Let's say you're staring at your hands. You don't feel anything. They're just there. Now picture losing the use of them. Try it. No drama. No horror. Just pause and picture. Suddenly, their quiet presence means more. The fact that they can still move, pick up a glass, brush your teeth. That starts to feel like something. And if not a feeling, then at least a fact worth noticing. That's the gift of negative visualization. It helps numbness give way to noticing. Even if you still don't feel grateful, you become aware of the space where gratitude could live. And sometimes that's the first step back. Let's go smaller. You're brushing your teeth. It feels robotic. But then you remember, one day, you might not have your teeth. Or the ability to stand steadily. Or the autonomy to choose your toothbrush. And weirdly, that moment, still emotionally neutral, gains gravity. You still might not feel joy. But now there's weight. Presence. Maybe even reverence. Here's a strange but beautiful footnote. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus was disabled. He walked with a limp from a broken leg he suffered as a slave. But he used that limitation as fuel. Not for bitterness, but for grounding. His condition reminded him daily of impermanence. And from that reminder came calm, not panic. You don't have to be in pain to use this tool. Your numbness, in a way, already is a form of subtle loss. The absence of feeling is a kind of grief. And negative visualization says, okay. Let's acknowledge that. Let's sit with it. Let's name what could disappear, so that maybe, just maybe, you begin to see what's still here. Try this, tonight, before you go to sleep. Look around your room. Choose 3 things. They don't have to be sentimental: your lamp, your pillow, your window. Now ask yourself, what if this were gone tomorrow? Would I have noticed it today? You don't need to manufacture emotion. Just notice the noticing. That's the real trick here. You're not trying to force feeling. You're trying to increase awareness. The Stoics didn't aim for joy, they aimed for presence. And sometimes, imagining the absence of something is the clearest way to see it. There's also an emotional safety net in this practice. When you're already numb, you're less likely to spiral into panic. You can use visualization as a purely reflective tool. Think of it as running your fingers along the edges of things you usually ignore. No drama. No deep dives. Just a soft scan of your world. And here's a nice counterpoint. Once you've imagined the loss, return to the moment. Feel the pillow under your head. The hum of the fridge. The light tapping of rain outside your window. You've just sharpened your attention, gently. Now, let it settle. One more quirky note from Stoic history: Emperor Marcus Aurelius would often walk the palace gardens alone, imagining the entire empire vanishing. He'd say to himself, all of this will pass. And I must do good while I can. Not to dampen his mood, but to keep himself awake, to his power, and his responsibilities. Even when he felt nothing. So tonight, in your emotionally quiet state, take a moment to try this. Think of something simple. Something that hasn't moved you lately. Now picture its absence. And then, return to it. Notice it again. Let the stillness hold it for a moment longer. Because this practice doesn't demand a feeling, it invites a shift in attention. And in that shift, numbness often starts to thaw. And from there, we begin to explore one of the Stoics' most grounding habits, the quiet ritual of reflection. Not for answers. Not for emotion. Just for presence. So you're still in this fog, maybe a little more aware now, maybe noticing tiny details with more care. You're not overwhelmed, and still not exactly feeling much. But something else has started quietly forming beneath the surface. Not joy. Not clarity. Just awareness. A subtle return to the texture of things. A sense of space. This is where the Stoics would introduce one of their simplest, most profound practices: rituals of reflection. No incense. No candles. No dramatic invocations of the cosmos. Just you, at the end of the day, sitting quietly and asking, how did I live today? That's it. They weren't looking for feelings. They were looking for alignment. Did I act in line with what I believe? Did I speak with integrity? Did I resist what didn't serve me? That kind of honest check-in wasn't about perfection, it was about progress. And for you, especially in a season of emotional quiet, this might be the most powerful habit you can build. In mainstream psychology, this tracks closely with the concept of self-monitoring, the practice of recording thoughts, behaviors, or choices to increase self-awareness. A 2019 study in Journal of Behavioral Science found that even short nightly reflections increased long-term behavioral consistency, even in participants reporting low emotional engagement. It's not about feeling something. It's about noticing something. And here's the beauty: in your emotionally flat state, you're actually more equipped for this than you might think. You're not swept up in reaction. You have space. You have calm. You have the ability to observe without bias. And observation without judgment? That's Stoic gold. A fun little twist from ancient texts: Seneca, toward the end of each day, would lie in bed and silently audit his thoughts. What bad habit did I resist today? Where did I fall short? Where did I succeed in being a better version of myself? He wasn't punishing himself, he was fine-tuning his inner compass. Kind of like nightly flossing for the soul. Now here's the Stoic trick: you don't have to feel guilty to notice your missteps. You don't need to feel proud to acknowledge your wins. This practice doesn't depend on mood. It depends on honesty. So here's what you do. Set aside 3 minutes at night. Sit with a pen, or just in your head. Ask: what did I do today that reflected my values? Where did I drift away from who I want to be? What's one thing I can do better tomorrow? Don't overthink it. Don't try to stir up emotion. Just observe. Like a quiet scientist watching a creature in a tank, neutral, attentive, curious. Philosophers have long debated the utility of self-reflection, whether it leads to self-awareness or self-absorption. Some argue it becomes a loop of overthinking. But the Stoics didn't reflect to analyze themselves into paralysis. They reflected to remind themselves who they were trying to be. And that's the key: you're not trying to extract feelings from yourself. You're trying to remember who you are underneath them. Let's say you go through your whole day on autopilot. You didn't feel present. You didn't feel much at all. But at night, you recall holding the door for someone. You remember choosing not to snap at a coworker. You remember brushing your teeth even though it felt pointless. That's not meaningless. That's intentional action, quietly moving you forward. Just a quirky example from modern therapy: some ACT therapists, acceptance and commitment therapy, not drama class, use a technique called values journaling with clients experiencing emotional numbness. These journals focus not on emotion, but on evidence of values-based behavior. It turns out that noticing what you did, not what you felt, can help restore a sense of agency and calm. Which, as it happens, is exactly what the Stoics were doing 2,000 years ago. And here's another layer: you can reflect on your numbness itself. Try writing this down sometime. Today, I didn't feel much. But I still, and finish the sentence with something you did. Something small. Something quiet. Something that showed up even without fanfare. That's how you honor your effort without needing emotional applause. Because let's face it, sometimes numbness makes you feel like the day didn't happen. Like you floated through it behind glass. Reflection brings you back into it. It reclaims the day as yours. You remember the moment you sat on the train and looked out the window. The moment you fed your pet. The moment you resisted the urge to doomscroll. These are not grand victories, but they are returns. They're proof that even when your feelings have gone on sabbatical, your awareness hasn't. Here's a small ritual to try if journaling feels like too much. Lie in bed, close your eyes, and replay the day like a movie. No commentary. No emotional grading. Just watch. Scene by scene. Waking up. Brushing teeth. Making food. Opening emails. Saying hello. Just observing. You'll begin to see, you were there. You did participate. You did choose. That's Stoicism at its purest, showing up, regardless of mood. And if you really want to echo the old masters, whisper a question to yourself before sleep. if I don't wake up tomorrow, did I live today with intention? Not to scare yourself, but to gently sharpen your lens. To remind yourself that every quiet day still matters. There's strength in this practice. Because when emotions eventually return, and they will, you'll have a foundation waiting for them. A steady sense of self that didn't evaporate in the fog. And that foundation? It carries us into the next step, how to build a meaningful life even when your emotions have hit pause. You've made it through another quiet day. No big highs. No dramatic lows. Just a slow, steady rhythm of doing what needed to be done, even if nothing inside cheered you on. And as you sit with that, you might start to wonder, if I'm not feeling anything, can my life still have meaning? The Stoics would answer that question with a calm and resounding, yes. In fact, they'd probably go further and say, meaning doesn't come from feelings, it comes from alignment. From living in harmony with your principles, your values, and your reason, regardless of your emotional state. Because to the Stoics, emotions are temporary guests. But your choices? That's your home. That's who you are. Now let's be real, modern culture doesn't teach us that. It tells us meaning comes from passion. From excitement. From feeling alive. From crying at sunsets and belly laughing over brunch. And when you're emotionally numb, that kind of life can feel 1,000 miles away. But what if all of that, while beautiful, isn't required? What if you could still live a deeply meaningful life, even when the colors are muted, even when the music's turned down low? There's actual psychological backing for this. A 2020 study in Journal of Positive Psychology examined people going through emotional flattening due to depression, chronic illness, or grief. Surprisingly, many of them still reported a strong sense of meaning in life. How? By focusing on contribution and consistency, not emotion. They didn't feel much, but they did what mattered. And over time, meaning started to rebuild itself, not from passion, but from purpose. A quirky detail from Stoic tradition, when Epictetus was asked what a philosopher's job was, he didn't say, to feel or to be inspired. He said, to keep watch over himself. That was the measure of a good life. A life lived in constant alignment with reason and virtue, even if the inner emotional weather was cloudy or still. A long-standing philosophical debate asks whether meaning is something we find in the world, or something we create through action. Stoicism lands solidly in the second camp. The world doesn't owe you meaning, it's your job to carve it out. Like shaping a sculpture out of a block of stone, moment by moment, decision by decision. So let's bring that down to earth. Imagine you spend your day in emotional neutral. You make your bed. You call your sister. You help a coworker. You eat something nourishing. None of it feels particularly rewarding. But all of it reflects your values. All of it contributes to the world in some small way. That day wasn't empty. That day meant something. And if you stack those days together, quiet, neutral, value-aligned, you start to see a life that's not dictated by mood, but grounded in choice. A life that holds shape, even when the emotional wind isn't blowing. Here's an exercise to try: make a meaning inventory at the end of your day. Not what you felt was meaningful, just what was. I walked the dog. I finished my work. I didn't snap at that person who cut me off. I watered my plants. These are not small. These are signs of a life lived in integrity. And if you want to go deeper, ask, which value did I live out today, even in silence? Maybe it was patience. Maybe it was responsibility. Maybe it was curiosity, showing up just enough to keep listening to your own thoughts. That's meaning. Quiet, non-flashy, but real. Here's a weird but grounding practice some modern Stoic circles have revived: the virtue ledger. You write out your core values: justice, courage, discipline, kindness, and at the end of each day, mark where you lived them. Not for perfection. Just for presence. Even if your emotional scorecard is blank, your virtue ledger fills up slowly, quietly, faithfully. Now, does this mean you give up on joy? On connection? Not at all. But it means you stop making them prerequisites for meaning. You let life be meaningful before the feelings show up. That's a whole different kind of freedom. Because here's something true, feelings can't always be trusted. They ebb. They vanish. They sometimes lie. But meaning, when built through aligned action, doesn't disappear so easily. It sticks. It lingers. It makes even the quietest days feel lived. Just a quirky thought from Marcus Aurelius himself: if it's endurable, then endure it. Stop complaining. And this might sound cold at first, but it wasn't about suppressing suffering. It was about reclaiming agency. You can endure numbness. You can even do good inside it. That's power. So if you're lying there tonight, wondering why you still feel flat, here's the truth: you're not failing. You're training. You're laying down tracks for meaning to run on, even when there's no fuel in the tank. You're building a life that doesn't collapse when the feelings go quiet. That's rare. That's real. That's Stoic. Let's zoom out for a moment. What does a meaningful life look like without emotion as the guide? It looks like doing the next right thing, even when you don't feel like it. It looks like reflecting at night, even when the day felt like a blur. It looks like honoring your values, even when nobody's watching. It looks like choosing stillness, not as a punishment, but as a practice. You're doing that right now. And slowly, maybe quietly, that meaning begins to generate its own heat. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But meaning has gravity. It pulls feeling back in over time, not because you forced it, but because you made space for it. So rest tonight in that idea. You don't need to feel meaning to live meaningfully. You just need to keep showing up. Thoughtfully. Simply. Steadily. And from there, we'll step into the final movement, an embrace of the deep, quiet soul you've built along the way, even in the stillest water. Still here. Still quiet. Still feeling like the inside of your chest is paused. Not aching. Not rushing. Just still. But now, there's something else sitting beside that stillness. Something more settled. More open. Something like acceptance. And that's the final layer the Stoics offer, not the loud kind of peace that comes from breakthroughs or emotional release, but the subtle kind. The kind that lives in still water. That whispers, even when you feel nothing, your soul is still deep. This is the paradox at the heart of Stoicism. You're not supposed to chase intense feelings. You're supposed to clear space for presence, and sometimes, that presence feels like nothing. But that's nothing. It's full of awareness. It's full of potential. It's where real calm begins. This might surprise you: the ancient Stoics didn't idealize happiness. They didn't even really talk about joy the way modern wellness culture does. What they aimed for was eudaimonia, a word often mistranslated as happiness, but really meaning something closer to flourishing or being aligned with your highest self. Not feeling good, but being good. And being good doesn't require an emotional soundtrack. It requires integrity. Stillness. Clarity. A 2021 review in philosophy, psychiatry, and psychology explored how emotional blunting, especially in people recovering from trauma or burnout, can become an unexpected gateway into deeper spiritual experiences. Not dramatic awakenings, but slow, quiet reorientations. When your feelings go silent, your attention sharpens. You stop chasing highs. You start noticing roots. There remains considerable disagreement about whether emotional detachment can truly coexist with spiritual depth. Some say real connection requires emotional vividness. But Stoic thought suggests the opposite, that depth isn't what you feel, it's what you sustain. You're still showing up. Still reflecting. Still breathing through the quiet. That's depth. A quirky thought from later Stoic texts: they often described the ideal mind as like a still harbor. Ships, emotions, events, disruptions may come and go, but the harbor remains. Deep. Anchored. capable of receiving without being disturbed. You, right now, are practicing that stillness. Not frozen. Not shut down. Just deep enough to hold what arrives without flinching. And yes, maybe your life still feels emotionally colorless. Like the lights have dimmed and the volume has dropped to a whisper. But in that soft space, there's room for something honest. Something unfiltered. Something sturdy. Let's say tomorrow you wake up and still feel flat. No sudden joy. No urge to cry. Just, you. The ceiling. Your breath. And instead of launching into, why do I still feel this way, you quietly think, this is what peace looks like right now. That's a kind of emotional intelligence most people will never develop. Because it's not reactive. It's not dramatic. It's not even particularly inspiring. But it's strong. It's anchored. It's real. And here's the gentle twist: when emotions do return, when they bubble up again, when you feel the first flicker of warmth or grief or beauty, you'll meet them differently. You won't cling. You won't panic. You'll just notice. And that's Stoicism working. You'll say, oh. There you are. Welcome back. Let's sit together a while. Because you've learned to befriend the stillness. To hear yourself in silence. To act without applause. That changes the way you carry joy when it comes back. It doesn't own you anymore. It walks beside you. One last quirky note: Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, lost everything in a shipwreck. Literally. Clothes, cargo, all of it, gone. But standing there, wet and empty-handed, he said something close to, now that fortune has wrecked me, I can begin to think freely. That's what this emotional quiet might be for you, not a loss, but a clearing. A clearing where you learn to let values guide you when feelings don't. See the world not through urgency, but through quiet observation. Show up for others and yourself, not with energy, but with steadiness. Trust that meaning can exist even when mood is nowhere to be found. You're not broken. You're just in a different phase of knowing yourself. A phase the Stoics walked through many times. One they trusted. One they used to build strength that didn't depend on sunshine or serotonin. So tonight, if you're sitting there and still feel nothing, let that be okay. Let it be enough. You've traveled through yourself without needing loudness. You've chosen presence over performance. That's not numbness. That's depth. And that depth, it holds. Even in silence. Especially in silence. So let's settle in now, into the final wind down. You're here. Still. And the day is done. Your breath moves slowly now, maybe even deeper than before. The lights around you soften. The noise inside you has dulled to a low hum. You don't have to fix anything tonight. You don't have to chase meaning or emotion or clarity. You've done enough. Let everything fall quiet. The Stoics didn't fear silence. They made it sacred. So you can let go of the pressure to feel something profound. Let go of the weight of needing answers. Let go of the loop that asks, why am I still not okay? You are okay. Even like this. Because still water runs deep. Feel the weight of your body in the bed or chair or floor. Feel the temperature of the air on your skin. Let your hands rest, your shoulders drop. There's no test here. No performance. Just this moment. Just breath. Just being. This quiet is not absence. It's presence, turned down low. Maybe your feelings will return tomorrow. Maybe they won't. But you've learned how to sit beside them either way. Without forcing. Without judgment. With calm. With depth. So stay here as long as you like. Let this be enough. Let you be enough. Stillness is not the opposite of life. It's where life waits, gently, patiently, for you to notice. Sleep well, thinker. You've earned the quiet.